Today's daf is daf Ayin Aleph, and we start with the Mishnah. Now, by way of introduction, this Mishnah is dealing with a case where a Jew is selling his wine to a guy, and that per se is okay. But the only thing is that the Jew has to make sure that at the moment that the wine becomes Yayin Nesech, when the guy, the idolater, touches the wine, at that point the wine no longer belongs to the Jew. If the Isser of Yain Nesech, by way of the guy touching the wine, comes before the actual acquisition of the guy, that means that the Jew's wine is now Yain Nesech, and he can't sell it because then he would benefit from Isuri Hano. So the Mishnah establishes the following rules. Ha'umnin Yisrael, meaning Jewish umnin, if, for example, the purchaser, who's an idol worshiper, will, instead of paying cash to buy the Jew's wine, he sends the Jew a barrel of Yain Nesach wine. So what that would mean is that the Jew is now benefiting from Yain Nesach because he's getting Yain Nesach from the idolater. So these are umnin that are paid a wage, they're Jewish workers, and if they're paid with Yain Nesach, then the Jew will not be able to benefit from that Yain Nesach. So he's in a bind. So what's he allowed to do? What's he not allowed to do? The Mishnah establishes mutalo litain, mutalo lomar. He can instruct the idolater, who's the employer in this case, Tain lanu es dameha. Instead of paying us with a barrel of wine, pay us with money, with cash. Now that's okay. That's permissible because the Jew is not getting any direct benefit from the Ayin Nesech. He's getting paid with money. If the Jew had instructed the guy to pay him by first selling the Ayin Nesech and then converting it into cash and then passing on the cash to the Jewish workers, that might be a problem. So the Mishnah continues and says, Mishanichnes Oler Shusan, also, if at some point the Jewish workers made a kinyan on the Ayin Nesach, meaning they accepted it as payment, and then they said to the guy, you know what, do me a favor and take back the Ayin Nesach and give me money instead, cash instead, that would be a problem. Because then it's like they're selling the wine, which is Yayin Nesach, back to the guy. They're not allowed to do that. That's already a violation of Isur Hano. So the Mishnah is basically saying that we have to guarantee that before the Jew gets any sort of possession over the Yayin Nesach, he just tells the guy, I want cash instead of the Yayin as payment. Then the guy will then switch the Yayin Nesach and instead pay him with cash. That's fine. Amarav Yehuda Amarav, Mutoli Adam Lomalovit Kol Chavim, Tzei v'hafeis halai Minas Hamelech. Minas Hamelech is referring to a tax, literally translated Minas Hamelech, the king's portion, being the tax. And the Jew wants to tell the guy to go ahead and pay the tax, and the tax could be paid even with Yayin Nesach, meaning it's the idolater's decision how he will pay the tax on behalf of the Jew. If he decides that he wants to pay the tax with Yayin Nesech and the king will accept that as payment for the tax, that's fine. Because the Jew never instructed the guy to specifically pay the tax with Yayin Nesech. That would be a violation of getting Hano from Yayin Nesech. Instead, the Jew said in a general sense, save our face, pay up the tax, I'll reimburse you. And you could decide how you want to pay the tax. If the guy made the decision he wants to pay with the Ayin Nesech, that's not the problem of the Jew. So the Gemara quotes a brisa now that seems to say the opposite. Meisvei al yomar odom liovid kol chavim ul tachtai laotzer. Now the word ul means to go up or to go into. Tachtai means in my place. Laotzer means to the ruler. Go in my place, meaning I have to go to the ruler to pay my taxes. I want you to substitute for me. And I want you to go in there and pay my taxes. And the Brisa says that that's us. You're not allowed to do so. Why? Because if the guy is paying up the tax with Yayin Nesech, and the Jew has instructed the guy, Tachtai, to be my agent in paying up the tax, then it's as if the Jew himself was paying up the tax with Yayin Nesech. So therefore, I don't understand Rabbi Yehuda Marav, who allows you to tell the guy to pay the taxes. Amalei Rav says that that's not a kasha from the Brisa. Ul tachtai liotzer kamrid. You're asking me a question from the case of ul tachtai. In that case, the Jew appointed the guy as his agent, as the extended arm of the Jew himself to pay the tax with Yayin Nesech. It's as if the Jew himself is paying up the tax with Yayin Nesech and benefiting that he has a p'tur from the taxes through the Yayin Nesech. Holo damya elulaha. Rabbi Yehuda's case that he said in my name, Rav says, is the following. Aval omer lo malteni. This appears at the end of the brisa. Min ha'otzer. That's mutter, because he only tells the idol worshippers, I have a noose around my neck. I have to pay these taxes. Save me and spare me from this noose by paying up my obligation to the ruler. But you'll decide how you want to pay it up. I'm not appointing you as my agent. I'm just asking you, requesting you to do a favor for me and save me from that obligation of paying the tax. And this leads us to the second Mishnah on Daf Ayin Aleph. And again, we're talking about the relationship between the Goy and the Jew in terms of Ayin Nesech. In this particular Mishnah, as I mentioned at the start, we're talking about a Jew selling his wine to an idolater. And in doing so, when the wine is being collected by the purchaser, who's the idolater, we have to make sure that if the idolater touches the wine, he doesn't do so while the wine is in possession of the Jew. We have to make sure that first the guy, the idolater, will make a kinyan on the wine. Now it's his wine, and if he touches it and makes it into Yayin Nesech, that has nothing to do with the Jewish owner who sold his wine. So therefore, the Mishnah establishes Hamocher Yeno le'ovei kol chavim. He should be pasak ad shalom madad, and therefore damav mutarin. The price is already set, and the idol worshiper now measures out the wine, and now the money which is being paid by the guy, by the idol worshiper to the Jew, is mutar ba'no. So far, so good. So this is the case where the price was set before the idol worshiper measured out the wine. But, and now we'll get some clarity here, modad ad shelo pasak, if on the other hand, the guy will measure out the wine, they haven't decided yet how much money the purchaser, the guy, is going to pay for the wine. And Domav Asurim, at this point, with the Medida, with the measuring out of the wine by the idol worshiper now has not yet made a kinyan, and he's already established the wine as Yayin Nesach. So now the Jew is holding on to Yayin Nesach, and he hasn't yet been paid. So the kinyan on the part of the guy is going to come subsequent to the guy's measuring out the wine, when he'll pay money. Now that money is now being exchanged for Yayin Nesach. It already became Yayin Nesach in the possession in the hands of the Jew. And now the guy is paying up for Yayin Nesach. That's basically a sale of Yayin Nesach. And that's a benefit from Isuri Ano, because Yayin Nesach is also, no, you can't sell Yayin Nesach. Omar Meimar. Meshicha bi ove kochavim kona. So again, this concept which we're about to embark upon is going to be very relevant to our Mishnah, but down the line. The issue on the table here of Hamemar is, at what point does and how does a guy clinch a kinyan and make it his? And Hamemar is going to tell us that even before the guy pays for something, once he takes the object into his possession, for example, Mashicha, he pulls it, then it's already his, despite the fact that he hasn't paid for it yet. I mean, you could just imagine, you go into a store, let's say an electronics store, you pick up something, you haven't paid for it, and now it falls. Who has to suffer that loss? Well, if you hold Mashicha Kanya, then even though you haven't paid for it, the very moment that you picked it up, if it falls, you have to reimburse the owner. I'm just giving one example, but there are many, many examples. Now, what's interesting about the next line in the Gemara is that a Meimer is going to prove his point based on what is accepted practice amongst the non-Jews, which is interesting because we're asking a halachic legal question, but we're going to somehow answer that question and come to a final decision about what the halachic ruling is based on the way Goyim will transact amongst themselves. Then I'll prove it to you, says Amemar. Tahani Parsoi, so we're talking about Persians, non-Jews, Mishadre, they send Pardesheni La'adodi Velo Hadri Bahu. Now, the word Pardashani is to be translated as a gift. So they send the Persians gifts to one another, one Persian to another. And the gift is considered final, right? No backs, even though there was no payment of money. So evidently we have to come to the conclusion that Mashicha is Kona. How can we derive that conclusion from the way the Persians, interact in financial matters? Apparently, this appella to me, idol worshippers would also base their conclusions on the biblical verses. So he's not deriving halachic conclusions from the custom of the Goyim, but rather the custom of the Goyim is proof for what the halacha is. Very, very sensitive. Now, Tosas points out that our discussion is about Mashiach, whether it's effective or you have to get paid for it. But that has no relevance to the case of a gift. In the case of a gift, the Kenyan is clinched without any money. There's no money here involved because it was an outright gratis gift. So since no cash exchanges hands, then it's obvious that the Kenyan itself, the acquisition of the gift, is clinched through Mashiach once the recipient takes physical possession over the object. Therefore, Tosfos is forced to say that the word pardashani is not a gift, because then it would not support a memar in any way. So we're going to have to say that this is a sale and money is being exchanged. Rav Ashi that even though a Jew can acquire ownership from another Jew through Mashiach, but nevertheless a Goy does not acquire ownership through Mashiach. When you ask me why is it the accepted custom amongst the Persians that they never retract a Kenyan, even though the money wasn't paid, is that's because the Rus Rucha who dinokule, they're too big on themselves and haughty to come back and say, all right, give it back to me. I want to change my mind. That's like not something that's becoming of someone who's very haughty. Okay, so now Rav Ashi seems to be saying, Omar Rav Ashi Eno Kona. And the fact that they don't retract it is amongst the Persians, that's because of haughtiness. And Mina Minale, I want to prove to you that Mashiach is not a valid acquisition. Mida Omer Lahu Rav Lahanu Savoisa. Now, the word Savoisa is to be translated as wine cellars. So Rav instructed Jewish wine sellers, Ki kalisu chamra liovikal chafim, chamra is wine, and when you're measuring out wine in order to sell it to the idolaters, shiklu zuzi binai, make sure that before the measuring of the wine, which would make the wine into yayin nesech, you've already accepted payment for the wine. Bahadar, and after you've accepted payment for it, kailon lehu, then measure out the wine. And the reason for this, says Rav Ashi, is because a guy cannot acquire acquisition with Mashiach. He needs kesef. He's got to be paid. Or in the case of a non-Jewish buyer, he's got to pay. Until he pays, even if he did a Mashiach, he doesn't acquire ownership on it. And therefore, you have to be careful, instructs Rav Ashi to the wine seller, the Jewish wine sellers, to make sure that you get paid the money up front before they measure out the wine. So that now, when they're measuring out the wine, that wine already belongs to the idol worshiper. And the Jew is not benefiting in any way from Yain Nesach. But what if the guy who's buying your wine does not have cash? Then this is so important, says Rav. Says Rav Huna. I'm sorry, says Rav. That Ozivnu, you know what? Take the money out of your pocket, lend it to the guy, and then let the guy pay you that money, so that the guy, before he measures the wine, is the absolute owner. So the money is now a loan, and he is paying back a loan, this guy, and acquiring ownership over the wine. And this has to take place, says Rav, before the measuring of the wine, because otherwise it becomes yayin nesach. Te'ilo avida tuhach, if you don't do it the way I told you, ki kahavi yayin nesach b'shusaychu kahavi. Then the wine becomes yayin nesach, and it still is yours because he hasn't paid you money. And Mashiach is not a kinyan; he needs to pay you money. V'chisha klisu demei yayin nesach kosh klisu. Right? If the wine becomes yayin nesach in your possession, Mr. Yid, then you've got a real problem because when he pays you for what he pays you for is your yayin nesach. So you're getting money in a sale from your yayin nesach. What's Rav get so excited about here? If Mashiach is enough for kinyan,